I am my mother's lawyer." The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder on a clear day, causing Judge Harrison to stop leafing through the thick stack of legal documents and look up. Slowly, over the top of his glasses, David Thompson was only 9 years old, but his voice, clear and steady, cut through the formal, suffocating silence of the family courtroom like a sharp and very unexpected blade. He stood next to his mother, Janet, who was looking at him with a mixture of a profound, motherly pride and a very real and very raw terror. And across the room, Robert Wellington III, his biological father, a man who had built an empire on the ruins of other people's dreams, almost choked on his expensive imported coffee. "I'm sorry, young man," the judge said, his voice laced with a forced and very condescending patience as he looked at the skinny 9-year-old boy in the slightly too large glasses who had just dared to interrupt a multi-million-dollar custody case. "But this is a legal hearing between adults." "I know, Your Honor," David replied, his own voice unnervingly calm. "I also know that according to Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, a convention that was ratified by the United States, I have the right to express my own opinion on the matters that directly affect me." David adjusted his glasses and opened a scribbled and very worn school notebook. "In this case," he finished, "definitely affects me. If this story of a quiet and very brilliant courage and an even more powerful intelligence is already touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what David was about to reveal would not only change his own life forever, but it would also change the way the entire justice system views the voice of a child. Janet Thompson worked 60 long and very grueling hours a week as a nursing assistant just to be able to raise her son, David, on her own. In the 8 years since Robert Wellington had discovered that he was a father, a fact that had been confirmed by a court-ordered DNA test, I had appeared in his son's life exactly 4 times, always with a series of a very expensive and very soulless gifts, and always with a string of a beautiful and very empty promises. And now, suddenly, he wanted full custody. Janet watched her son now, small and very brave warrior, in a courtroom that was designed to crush people like them, with a mixture of a profound pride and a deep and very real panic, for weeks. David had been coming home from school with strange and very thick books from the public library, legal codes, children's rights manuals, and the dusty, forgotten records of old court precedents. She had thought, with a mother's gentle and very naive love, that it was just an academic curiosity from a very bright and very special child. She had never, not in her wildest, most imaginative dreams, ever imagined that he was preparing for this, for war. Robert Wellington shifted uneasily in his expensive leather chair. There was something about the boy's calmness that bothered him deeply. David didn't seem to be the least bit intimidated by the formal and very intimidating surroundings, by the expensive and very condescending lawyers, or by the imposing and very powerful presence of his own biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert opened his mouth to protest, but David continued, his voice a relentless and very powerful and very final rhythm. "The last time we saw each other, 6 months ago, you spent 15 minutes in our apartment. Just long enough to criticize our furniture, to complain about the medicine smell my mother brings home from the hospital, and to suggest that I might, just might, have potential if I ever received a proper education." David adjusted his glasses. "Interestingly," he said, 2 weeks after that visit, you filed for full custody." Judge Harrison, who had presided over hundreds and hundreds of custody cases in his long and very distinguished career, had never— "David," he said, his own judicial curiosity now clearly and completely piqued, "you have mentioned evidence. What kind of evidence could a 9-year-old boy have possibly gathered?" David adjusted his glasses again, a small and very endearing gesture that was now becoming his trademark in that courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, "for the past 3 months. Since I first learned of this lawsuit, I have devoted every single Tuesday and Thursday afternoon to my research at the Central Public Library." "Researching what?" Dr. Mitchell, Robert's lawyer, interrupted, his own voice dripping with a condescending and very patronizing amusement. Public records, David replied calmly. Newspaper archives, available corporate documents, and all. Of Mr. Wellington's previous court cases, he opened a new section of his notebook. The head librarian, a woman named Ms. Rodriguez, has a master's degree in information science, and she taught me how to access the basic legal databases. Janet looked at her son in a state of a pure and very beautiful and very profound amazement. For months, David had just said that he was studying for a special project at the library. She had never, not for a single moment, imagined that that project was to save their family. Mrs. Rodriguez had become so much more than just a librarian, too. David, when he had first showed up, asking her about how the family courts worked, she had quickly realized that this wasn't just an academic curiosity. It was a desperation that was masquerading as a quiet and very powerful determination. That boy, she had told Janet just the week before, when she had finally called her. Concerned, he has been coming here religiously for 3 months. He reads the legal codes like other kids read comic books. He is learning too fast to be normal. David continued his presentation methodically. I have discovered, he said, that in the last 18 months, Mr. Wellington has faced 3 very significant lawsuits. He lost a $2.3 million dispute with his former partners in Wellington Industries. His current wife, his third, has filed for a contested divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, which is, as we all know, a legal code for he hid money from me. Robert's face was now a deep and very ugly red with a pure and very real rage. How dare you, he shouted. And more interestingly, David interrupted as he turned the pages of his notebook. I discovered that my late paternal grandmother, Eleanor Wellington, established a trust fund of $1.7 million. Specifically for me, a trust fund that is accessible only when I turn 18, or, he paused, when my biological father obtains full legal custody. The silence in the room was now absolute. But before we talk about inheritances, and about very clear and very ugly financial motives, David said as he closed his notebook again, how about we discuss why a man who has never, not once in 9 long years, ever shown any genuine interest in being a father has suddenly, and so conveniently, developed such a strong and very paternal instinct. Robert Wellington was now visibly sweating, and his 2 very expensive lawyers looked completely and utterly lost. What exactly had this 9-year-old boy discovered during his long and very quiet afternoons at the public library? And how had a child managed to gather information that the adults, with their unlimited and very expensive resources, did not have? It was then that Robert Wellington had finally and completely understood what he had so foolishly and so completely underestimated. His 9-year-old son wasn't just smart, he was strategic. And he had uncovered secrets that even his own very expensive lawyers didn't know. What exactly had David discovered about Robert's true and very ugly plans for his education? And how had a child managed to build a stronger and much more powerful case than a team of millionaire lawyers, using only a public library and the quiet and very dedicated help of a single, solitary, and very kind librarian? In the silent, and now very tense, courtroom, everyone waited for the final revelation. A revelation that was promising to be even more devastating than anything they had heard so far. On the subject of my education, David repeated as he opened a final and very damning section of his notebook with the cool, calm precision of a seasoned surgeon. I would like to share Mr. Wellington's true and very ugly educational plans. For me, Robert Wellington swallowed hard, his own terrified eyes now darting nervously. Between his lawyer and the small and very powerful boy who had just, in that one single moment, become his worst and most terrifying nightmare. During one of my 4 very brief visits with him over the past 9 years, David continued methodically, I overheard a very, very interesting phone conversation. Mr. Wellington was talking to someone about solving the child problem. After he had obtained my full legal custody, Dr. Mitchell stood up abruptly. Your Honor, he said, private conversations cannot... I can prove every single word, David interrupted, as he pulled a small and very powerful digital recorder from his briefcase. So Miss Rodriguez, he said, taught me that a proper and very thorough documentation of your evidence is absolutely fundamental to any successful legal case. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Wellington was now visibly shaking, his own manicured fingers drumming so nervously on the polished wooden table, as he finally, and with a great and very final and very public certainty, realized that he had so completely and so utterly underestimated his own son's intelligence. This recording, David explained calmly to the judge, was made during his last visit to our apartment. 6 months ago, Mr. Wellington had thought that I was in my room doing my homework, but the recorder was left on in the living room. Sound of the recording echoed through the silent courtroom. The unmistakable and very arrogant voice of Robert Wellington spoke into the phone. Janet had covered her mouth with her hands, the hot and very real tears streaming down her face. She had never, not for a single moment, known that Robert had planned to get rid of their son so cruelly. Dr. Mitchell was pale, realizing, in that one single moment, that his own very powerful client had just been completely and utterly destroyed by his own very ugly words. And David, he had just calmly stopped the recording. There's more, he had said. This is the part about what he really thinks of me. The second part of the recording was even more devastating. Robert Wellington had exploded then. This is a trap, he had shouted. He provoked me on purpose. A 9-year-old boy cannot. Judge Harrison had turned off the tape recorder then, and he had looked directly at Robert Wellington. Mr. Wellington, he had said, this recording combined with the very clear, very damning financial evidence that has been presented here today, it paints a very, very clear picture of your own, very true motivations. Your Honor, David continued, I have also discovered that Riverside Military Academy has a terrible track record. In the last 5 years, 3 students have committed suicide there. The institution is under federal investigation for physical and emotional abuse of minors. Dr. Mitchell tried one last desperate card. Your Honor, even considering these allegations, the fact remains that my client has superior financial resources. Robert Wellington finally lost his composure completely. You're nothing but an arrogant child who doesn't know his place. Your father, and you're a stranger who shares my DNA, David replied with a calmness that sent a chill through the room. A real father wouldn't try to get rid of his own son to steal his money. The judge banged his gavel to restore order. Mr. Wellington, sit down immediately, or you will be removed from my courtroom. David turned to the last page of his notebook. Your Honor, there is one last thing I need to mention. Something I discovered about why my grandmother really set up that trust fund. Robert Wellington paled even more, if that was possible. Found a letter from her in the estate files. A letter addressed to me to be opened when I turned 16. David took a deep breath. But the librarian helped me find out that I can request early access in cases of custody disputes. The final bombshell was about to drop. My grandmother wrote that she knew Robert was never a good father, that she established the trust specifically to protect me from him, and that if he ever tried to get custody of me just for the money, I should use every resource in the trust to defend myself. David closed the notebook and looked directly at Robert Wellington. She even hired private investigators who documented all of his financial schemes over the years. It's all on file. With the fund's administrator, Robert Wellington slumped in his chair, finally realizing that he had been completely outmaneuvered by a 9-year-old. He had considered nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Based on all the evidence presented, including financial documents, recordings, and the plaintiff's demonstrated history, the custody request is categorically denied. Furthermore, I order a full investigation into the possible fraudulent use of trust funds. Dr. Mitchell whispered urgently to Robert, but it was obvious that the case was irretrievably lost. David methodically put away his materials, displaying the same calm he had maintained throughout the hearing. Your Honor, may I make one last request? You may, David. I would like Mr. Wellington to know that I did not do this out of anger or revenge. I did it because every child deserves to have a family that truly loves them, not one that sees them as a financial opportunity. As Robert Wellington left the room escorted by security guards, the judge had ordered his immediate arrest for attempted fraud. David finally allowed a small smile to appear on his face. In that silent courtroom, a 9-year-old child had just proven that intelligence, preparation, and true love can defeat any amount of money and privilege. But David's victory represented something much greater than a simple custody battle. It was the beginning of a transformation that would change his family's life forever. 3 years have passed since that historic day in court, and David Thompson's life has been transformed in ways that even his precocious intelligence could not have ever possibly predicted. The recording that destroyed Robert Wellington not only won the case, it went viral on social media, turning David into the national symbol of a generation of children who refused to accept injustice silently. The video racked up over 50 million views and inspired legislative changes in 17 U.S. states. The studio audience burst into emotional applause. Janet watched from backstage wearing her nursing supervisor's uniform, a promotion she received after her story inspired a national campaign about working mothers. The hospital where she worked had set up a scholarship fund called the Janet Thompson Program for children of low-income employees. His mother is here with us today, the host continued. Janet, how does it feel to see your son become an inspiration to millions of families? Janet joined them on stage, still shy from all the attention, but radiating the same pride she had felt that day in court. And it was true. David had spent the last 3 years visiting schools in underserved communities, teaching children about their basic legal rights. His book, Every Child Has a Voice, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to a fund that provided free legal assistance to families in custody disputes. David, tell me about the cool law libraries project you started, the host asked. Well, after I saw how a public library saved me, I thought, how many other kids are going through similar situations without knowing where to turn for help? David adjusted his glasses, a gesture that had become his trademark. We created small sections in 1,200 public libraries with children's rights books and simple language, as well as computers with free access to basic legal resources. The camera focused on Janet, who discreetly wiped away a tear. In 3 years, she had seen her son transform personal trauma into a social movement. Meanwhile, across town, Robert Wellington watched the television program from his small studio apartment in the suburbs of Chicago. His hair was gray, his clothes simple, and he worked as a salesman at an electronics store, the only job he could find after his story became public. The court-ordered investigation had revealed not only the attempt to defraud David's trust fund, but a web of financial schemes that completely destroyed Wellington Industries. Robert lost everything: his company, his mansion, his marriage, his reputation. His former partner sued him for fraud, and he spent 18 months in prison. The most painful thing for Robert was realizing that David never spoke ill of him publicly. When asked about his biological father, the boy always responded with a maturity that further embarrassed the man who had tried to use him. Back in the television studio, the host asked her final question. David, what advice would you give to other children who are facing difficult family situations? David thought for a moment, then looked directly into the camera. First, you are not alone. Second, you have more power than you know. Third, the truth always finds a way to win, even when it seems impossible. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the wisdom of someone who had faced giants and won. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too small to make a difference. I was 9 years old when I changed my life and my mother's life forever. You can change yours, too. 6 months later, David received a special letter. It was from Sophia Martinez, a 10-year-old girl from Los Angeles who had used the Cool Law Libraries project to help her immigrant grandmother avoid an unfair eviction. The letter ended with, "Thank you for teaching me that every child has a voice. I used mine and saved my family." Janet found David reading the letter in his room, surrounded by hundreds of similar letters from children across the country. "How does it feel to know that your courage has inspired so many people?" she asked. David carefully folded Sophia's letter and placed it in the special box where he kept all his correspondence. "Remember when you told me that sometimes the scariest Things in life turn out to be the most important. Janet nodded, remembering that conversation perfectly. I think I understand now. If Robert Wellington had never tried to tear us apart, I would never have discovered that a child can change the world when adults stop underestimating them. That same day, David received a call that would change his life again. Harvard University was offering a full scholarship to a special program in law and social justice. The first of its kind, created specifically for students who had demonstrated exceptional social leadership before the age of 16. Will you accept? Janet asked after David hung up the phone. I accept, but on one condition, David smiled. Want to use my education to create a legal system that protects all children, not just those who are lucky enough to be smart enough to protect themselves. Years later, when David Thompson became the youngest lawyer ever admitted to the bar at the age of 16, his first case was a lawsuit against the educational system for failing to teach basic children's rights in public schools. He won, setting a precedent that made legal education mandatory for all American students. Robert Wellington never fully recovered from his downfall. Living modestly and working jobs that barely paid his bills, he sometimes found himself thinking about the extraordinary son he had lost to greed. In moments of honesty with himself, he recognized that David had become exactly the kind of man he himself had never been able to be. David Thompson's story proved that true strength does not come from money or connections, but from a combination of intelligence, courage, and unconditional love. A 9-year-old boy had defeated a corrupt system using only a public library, unwavering determination, and the transformative power of truth. David learned that when you fight for what is right, the universe conspires in your favor. Wellington learned that underestimating a determined child can be the most expensive mistake of a lifetime. And millions of children around the world learned that their voices matter, that their rights are real, and that they are never too small to fight for justice. David's greatest revenge was not destroying Robert Wellington, it was building a legacy that would save thousands of families from the same injustices he had faced. If this story of courage and determination has inspired you, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones the world insists on underestimating.